Governor Polis.
Hey, good. How you doing, Mark? Chris, good to see you both.
Likewise.
So last fall, more than 100 world leaders gathered for the COP26 Climate Summit discussing international goals and priorities for addressing climate change. We're very excited today to talk to you about how those national goals around climate policy can be addressed and amplified at the state level. Across the West, wildfires have been one of the most devastating consequences of climate change, and the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control says the average wildfire season is now 78 days longer than the historical 4 months previously, and that Colorado now experiences large fires almost every month. What are the states like yours doing to prevent and respond to these stronger wildfire seasons?
So I'd really say the fire season is now all year long in Colorado. In fact, as you know, in the summer of 2020, we had the three largest wildfires in the history of our state. But you know what? Just last December, in December of all months, the middle of winter, 4 months ago, we had the most destructive fire in the history of our state that destroyed over 1,000 homes in Boulder County, the Marshall Fire. So this is a year-round threat. We also have drought conditions year-round. We're going to get into how we need to lead on climate and how the urgency is now. But certainly, as we develop around this drier, hotter climate, we need more defense perimeters around neighborhoods. That means areas that don't have potential fuel like grass or trees. We need to make sure that homes are built in a more resilient way. When people are near forested areas, they need to do mitigation and remove fuel that could potentially transfer a fire to their home. So there's a lot of different ways that we need to adapt to avoid these catastrophic fires with the reality of the hotter, drier weather.
In addition to wildfires, what other big climate concerns do you have in Colorado, and what solutions have you been working on to address them?
You know, there's a lot. So, for instance, I'll give you one that people might not think about if they don't live in Colorado. When wildfires hit, they denude entire, mountains and hills of all their trees and all their vegetation. What does that mean? Landslides when the rains come, right? And so we actually had a major landslide in Glenwood Canyon, main route, between Aspen and the Denver metro area. And the entire mountain collapsed up to 10, 15 feet of rubble because there was no vegetation holding it back because the fires had hit it the summer before. So floods, fires, and then drought would be the other one. We've been in a statewide drought most of the last 2 years, really affecting our ag communities, our farmers, our ranchers. That's a big economic driver of Colorado. We've been really focused on how we can help our ranchers and farmers prosper and succeed and transfer to a new generation, but it's really challenging in the face of a changing climate.
A Pew Research poll from 2020 found that Americans believe that the federal government has not done enough to address climate change. What actions can the states take independent of the federal government to help address climate change?
First of all, I agree with that. I really hope we get help from the federal government. But in the meantime, it's really up to states and local governments, cities, counties, states. As an example, in our state, we are locked in by rule and law. We'll be at over 80% renewable energy in just 7.5 more years by 2030. So very rapidly building this out. Our goal is 100% renewable energy statewide by 2040. There's already a couple towns that are already there. Actually, Aspen, Colorado was the first in the country to achieve 100% renewable energy for its municipal utility. And there's many cities and counties in our state, including major jurisdictions, that will be at 100% by 2030. So it really takes everybody working together to get there. We'd love to see a national policy and support for helping our country lead the way.
Are there any obligations states are required to meet as a result of federal policy or commitment, like the Paris Climate Agreement?
There's there's some. They're not really, they're not always on point. There's a Clean Air Act that dates from the Nixon administration. We have obligations under that. The Paris Climate Accords as are not binding in state law for states to meet. So you could have states that choose to do nothing and states that choose to do a lot. There are at least some sort of floors that states, can't get away with any pollution because of the interjurisdictional nature of pollution, right? Like you emit something here, and wind can take it to Nebraska, it can take it to Texas, vice versa. It really makes sense for the federal government to play a role in keeping our air clean and doing our part on climate.
Federal government has passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act back in November, and it allows states to receive between $2 and $45 billion for infrastructure projects, including funding for climate change and climate policies like zero emissions public transportation and school buses and the electric grid updates and many other things as well. Kind of along the lines of what you said earlier, you have many states that are already at 80%. You look to get to 100% renewable energy. So how are Colorado and other states using that money specifically as it relates to projects that will reduce the environmental footprint? And is that enough to get the jobs done? And I just even add on to that, it's new to me that you guys are at 80% of renewable energy in certain states. What are you doing, and what are you going to continue to do with that money that other states may not be doing?
So it's a good start, is the short answer, Mark. It's going to help us build out electrical vehicle charging infrastructure, and we've added to that on the state side. 13% of vehicles sold in Colorado were electric last month. This is big. This is happening now. When I talk to folks, I say, raise your hand if you drive an electric vehicle. Some do, and I say, you know what, for those who haven't, there's a good chance your next car will be. Because you know what, they're less expensive to operate, especially with gas where it's at. It just makes sense for people. But it's already, and we got to have the fast charging infrastructure. Another key piece is there's some funding for electric school buses, replacing those diesel school buses that kids have been taking to school for decades. Not only does that help our climate, but it helps kids' health, especially with asthma, especially bus drivers who are around them every day, kids. So it's a start. We're going to try to match that with some state money as well that we're putting towards that. So there's several pots of money in there, but it's not enough for the entire clean energy transition. It's just sort of a start on the infrastructure side of it over the next couple of years. We're very grateful for it. And then, as you mentioned, our transit agencies also receive some money under that bipartisan bill.
On a related note, gas prices have been steadily rising over the past year, hitting record numbers with a recent spike resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In 2022, we see the biggest increase of new electric cars coming to the market, and EV sales have been doubling and even tripling year over year. Is the nation's infrastructure ready to transition to electric vehicles, and what kind of investments are required to make that happen?
So if you'd asked me a year or two ago, I'd say, infrastructure might hold it back, but I think we're in a very different place today because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And as I mentioned, in Colorado, we have another infrastructure investment in EVs. So yes, we will be there with fast charging. The utilities are at the table. They're in the game. We're actually, I just unveiled that our state parks are all going to have fast charging infrastructure. It's a partnership with Rivian, which is kind of a great 4x4 that fits that outdoor lifestyle. There's also 4D Lightnings, electric pickup trucks coming on the market soon. So they're really entering all classifications of vehicles. When people see their high cost of gas, they're like, wow, I can zero that out. And by the way, electric vehicles also have much lower maintenance. So it's not only the gas you save, it's also much less wear and tear and maintenance. So they're just less expensive to operate. And with some of the rebates up front, it can actually cost you the same or less, and then cost you a lot less for operating. So it's happening. And yes, at least in Colorado, and I believe nationally because of the Infrastructure Act, the infrastructure will be there and is there today, and increasingly so going forward.
One of the primary concerns when it comes to electric vehicles is how that electricity is produced. So what are states doing to ensure that we have enough electricity from renewable energy to power these technologies of tomorrow, or I guess even of right now?
So first of all, EVs reduce emission even when you have states that might have a lot of coal or natural gas in their grid, because there's really nothing that's less efficient than that really small internal combustion engine. That is a very inefficient way from a climate perspective of converting fossil fuel into energy. So even the larger scale plants have several times more efficiency. Now, that being said, we're going to be at 80% renewable in Colorado in just 7.5 years. Other states aren't fully there. Some will probably be 20, 30, 40, 50%. But the key thing is that as any state looks at adding new capacity, solar and wind are simply far less expensive than new coal plants. I mean, they're 1/3, 1/4 the price for production. And so you see a lot of the new capacity going in on both solar and wind in areas that maybe have it, hydro. And over time, that'll lead to the retirement of coal. So I think it's really baked in. It's happening a little faster in Colorado, but it's going to happen everywhere.
That's great. Last question, Governor. What's the most important step forward needed for climate policy in the U.S.?
We'd love to see a national approach. So, I mean, there's this vague term kind of build back better, but it was like this package of all these things that nobody understood. But one thing that I hope Congress does is make a sizable investment in clean energy infrastructure. What does that mean? It means supporting EV infrastructure, reducing the cost of EVs, souping up the technology on storage. The federal government is well positioned to do that. That's probably the most important thing they could do for climate, as well as work with states like ours that actually want to lead the way to help us do that even more. In the meantime, continue at the local level. I mean, activism starts at home. Recycle and compost in your home. We do that. Another little tip, make sure if you drive a diesel car, especially, or a gas car, especially, that your tires are fully inflated. You actually get much worse mileage per gallon if your tires aren't fully inflated. So check them regularly. It'll also save you some money because gas is so expensive. So just, the things that individuals can do. And of course, continuing to call your elected officials, local, state, federal. It doesn't matter whether you're, Republican, Democrat, don't have a party, but just say, look, I live here. I want my family and friends to be able to live here for generations, do something on climate, take action on climate. And the more people hear that, the faster our state and nation will be able to go.
I was just going to say you're one of my favorite speakers. Thanks for doing this on a Sunday, but it really is great to hear you. Just very concise and to the point, and I'm glad you.
Yeah, I want to give people some tangible things they can do in their home and call politicians, because sometimes calling politicians just doesn't feel like you're accomplishing anything. So in the meantime, compost and inflate your tires, right?
The most important thing that we're trying to do is to make sure, like you said, people engage with their elected officials. It doesn't matter if they feel a kinship with them by party or by no party whatsoever. Just reach out and activate, and hopefully it's nice to hear that folks like you care what people think regardless of whether they voted for you.
Thank you so much. Take care, Governor.